Quadratic function. We talked about it yesterday. We talked about it all last chapter. We talked about a quadratic expression. Now we're looking at that function. And a quadratic function looks like y equals, so it's an input, output. So y is our output. And then it starts with that ax squared plus what? Good, plus bx plus c. Good. Y equals ax squared plus bx plus c. All right, we have a couple things that are happening with that. Then we're going to do 2 examples. It's kind of a long process, but the process, like step by step, each step is easy. It's like 5 steps, though, to graph. Before we start, though, we're going to talk about that vertex, that minimum and maximum. So remember when I have a parabola is a U shape. If you were gone yesterday, that's what we talked about, was these shapes that are created. They're U shapes. And this one, is this vertex going to be a maximum or a minimum? Minimum, good. So in this one, it's a minimum. Where in this one here, when it's more like a hill, that's a maximum. Now you're like, Miss Morrell, we drew this yesterday. What the heck? Okay, today we're going to talk a little bit about that graph and how we're going to tell which one is which. So I'm going to use blue for this one. Anytime I work with A today, I'm going to use blue. Okay, you can use highlighters again if you'd like to. So A, when we have a minimum, this happens when A is positive. So if A is a positive number, I like to kind of think about it like A is positive. If you're positive, that usually means you're happy. And in a smiley face, we would have a minimum. Or you can think of it as A is bigger than, what number does numbers have to be bigger than to be positive? 0, yeah. So our graph is going to look like this. It's kind of a good way for us to check our work as we go. If we know our A is positive, we know our graph should end up looking like that with a minimum. Yeah, you should probably grab some of that and then maybe go to the nurse. There's some there. That looks fun. That was really creepy how chill you are. Feel a little bit more panicked. Okay. All right, for our maximum, maximum is A is, do you need to go to the bathroom? Okay. A is negative. If you're a negative person, you frown a lot, you're upset a lot, so it's kind of an upset face, frowny face. A is negative. So we might say A is less than 0. Okay, some teachers, they like to use this greater than 0, less than 0. In my brain, I like to use the positive, negative. That's just the way my brain works a little bit better. Same thing with students. Some students like to think bigger than 0, less than 0. Other students like to just think positive, negative. It's up to you. Okay, so to find the vertex, we use this formula. First, we're going to do an ordered pair. In the first part of the ordered pair, we fill out a fraction, and the fraction goes, it's going to be like a negative sign and then a B. And then on the bottom goes 2A. And then there's going to be another number there. We won't know that number until we find that first number, because this is our input. So you're going to pick another number, another color for your B. I'm going to use yellow for B. So B is another really important part in our graph. And the way that I like to think of this, which is different than negative b. Sometimes we see that negative sign, and we're like, cool, if it's a 2, negative 2 is just negative 2, but if it's a negative, negative gets confusing. So I like to think of this as opposite of b. So if it's a positive, what's the opposite of a positive? Negative. What's the opposite of a negative? Positive. Okay, and then on the bottom we have 2 times a. All right, now remember our vertex is that middle part, and then we have that axis of symmetry. We have those parts that match as we go. So that vertex is going to be a really big deal to us today. All right, we have 2 examples. We're going to do example 1. We have y equals negative x squared plus 2x minus 3. Y equals negative x squared plus 2x minus 3. So our first step we're going to do here is identify that A, B, C. What is the A, the B, and the C? Hi, Samir, you sit back here. Hi, Samir, you sit back here. Welcome. All right, so our A is that first one. If it helps you to write it above, we can write it as ax squared plus bx plus c. Some of you are really good at this part without having to write that part in. So our A is the number in front of the x squared. So what number is in front of the x squared?
1.
Close. Negative 1. Yeah, we have a negative, and then we don't see a number there, so we can always put a 1. So A is negative 1. What's our B? 2. We just want the number. Yep, 2. And then our C? Negative 3. Okay, I'm using blue and yellow for that A and B. C is important too, but right now we're just going to be worried about A and B. All right, because our A is negative, as we graph this, there's lots of checks for us to see if we're doing what we're doing is right as we go. So first thing we're going to do is kind of visualize this. If A is negative, negative 1, am I going to get a minimum or a maximum? What does that A tell me? What kind of shape will my graph be? It's negative 1, so is it positive or negative? Negative. Good. So it's like a frowny face. If we have a frowny face, is that going to have a minimum or a maximum? Maximum. Good. So that's a good way for us to just double check as we graph that we do have a maximum there. All right, our next step after we do this is to find the vertex. I'm going to work a little bit vertically here, and then we'll put our graph off to the side here. So our next step is to do the vertex. And for that vertex, we're using that formula, opposite of B over 2A. That's going to help us find that center. So opposite of B over 2A. Okay, again, if you need to color code that, you can. So what is our B from our equation? Woof. Kalani, what's our B? 2, thank you. Okay, and then class, what's the opposite of 2? negative 2. So we're going to use negative 2, because remember that little dash on the outside thinks opposite. And then on the bottom, we still have this 2 that's part of the formula. It will always be a 2 to start off with. And then in parentheses, what is our a? Negative 1. Okay, then you could simplify this one step at a time. You could do that multiplying and then do dividing. Or if you're using Desmos, you could just type that all in at once. If you had Desmos ready, there we go. So negative 2 over, and then 2 parenthesis negative 1. And our answer is 1. So this is the part that I'm just using my brown colored pencil just to kind of draw attention to this. If you want to underline it, or you could like star it. That's an important part. That's going to be our middle. Okay, so our last step before we actually go to our graph is we're going to make a table. Our table is going to have inputs and outputs. Our inputs are what variables usually? It's x's. Good, we're super smart today. And our outputs are y's. We want our table to be 5 rows long. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. That's going to, again, help us do some of those checks. Okay, our vertex 1 needs to go on the table. When we think about a vertex, is a vertex at the beginning of a graph, the middle of a graph, or at the end of a graph? Where do we want that maximum to be? We want it to be in the middle. So I'm going to take that 1, and I'm going to put it in the middle. So that's why I put that star there. That tells me that that goes in the middle. I'm not just guessing random numbers here. I'm going to use that vertex for the middle. And then I'm using numbers above and numbers below. So what would come before 1? 0, and then negative 1. And on the other side? 2 and 3. Okay, now for this y, we're going to be going back to our equation. It said y equals negative x squared. So we're going to do negative something squared plus 2. And then again, we have another x, so parentheses minus 3. And we're going to be filling in these parentheses with these numbers. Okay, I highly recommend using Desmos for this because it's going to go a lot faster because you don't have to re-type everything as you go. So I'm going to start by just typing this in. So negative parentheses squared plus 2 parentheses minus 3. Okay, so that's my rule. What's my first number we're going to put it into the parentheses? We'll put in negative 1. So I'm going to put negative 1 here for this parentheses and negative 1 here for that parentheses. And our answer is negative 6. Now the reason why I like using Desmos for this is because I don't have to delete everything. I can just delete those negative 1s and start again. So now what's my next input? 0. Put 0 into both the parentheses, and we get out negative 3. Okay, I'm going to delete the zeros and put in 1. I do need to be careful, though, because I need to put a 1 in for both the parentheses. So 1 and 1. And we get out negative 2. Okay, at this point it's just input output, so we're just deleting the 1, and we're going to put in 2 and 2. Oop, we get out negative 3. Anyone have a guess of what it will be when I put in 3? Anyone pick up on a pattern there? we get negative 6. How might we have known that that was going to be negative 6? Where would we have seen that? Oh boy. Okay, so remember we have that line of symmetry, that axis of symmetry that was right through the middle of our parabola, and then it matches on both sides. So when we hit that vertex, that negative 2, that's where it starts matching. So see how negative 3, those match? And then negative 6 with negative 6. It should match like that on its way out. All right. If you'd like to, you can either graph it first and then glue it in, or if you want to glue it in first, you can, but we're going to graph these points, and then I'm going to glue it in up here. So I'm going to actually graph it first. So on your graph, make sure your y is at the top, x is over here. Okay, I'm going to graph it first, then I'm going to glue it in. If you want to do the same, it's your choice. Okay, our first ordered pair we have is negative 1, negative 6. So on my x-axis, I'm going to go left 1, and then negative 6 tells me go down 6, so all the way to the bottom. Okay, this is a tricky one. 0, negative 3. 0 tells me don't go left or right. The negative 3 is in the y, so that tells me to go down 3. And it's on the y-axis there. It's our y-intercept. Okay, next we have 1, negative 2. So right 1, down 2. Two, negative 3. So right 2, down 3. And this is where it should start matching up, so you should see it kind of matches up as we go through. And then 3, negative 6. Okay, as you draw your line through it, remember this is a curve. The more you do these, the better you get at drawing curves. So you might look at mine and be like, dang, Miss Morel is perfect. Why is mine not perfect like hers? It's because I've done this a lot. Okay, so as you draw up, you don't want it to look like a V. We want to make sure as it goes up, it's going to curve to that U here, and then it curves back down. So try and get that to be more of a U shape as it gets to that top, and then arrows on both sides. Not my best curve, but it's getting there. All right, and then go ahead and glue that in. I'm going to have to glue mine in just a little bit taller right up here because that's where I have spot, the room. So find room near that problem 1 to glue that in. And then we have one more problem we're going to do together, and then you do have a kind of a worksheet. Quick check. All right, so go ahead and get that glued in, and then we're going to have one more problem that we're going to do. You guys are really quiet today, freaking me out. Okay, so a couple things to check so that we so that we know that we did it right. Originally we said there was going to be a maximum. Did we get a maximum? Yep. Okay. Did it match up where we had that line of symmetry? Yep. And as we graphed it, did it match up as we graphed? If I look at that vertex and work my way down, does it match as I go? Yep. So those are all good ways to double check that as what you're doing is making sense. If your graph all of a sudden looks like it keeps going up and up and up and up and it never stops going up, that's a good indicator that we didn't quite find that vertex correctly. So as you work on your practice today or your quick check today, that'll be a good way to double check what you are doing. All right, number 2, last one we're going to do together. You guys seem real excited. Woohoo! All right, number 2, we have y equals 2x squared minus 8x plus 4. All right, so first step that we're going to do, eventually we won't write this step down. This is just a thinking step, but we're going to continue to write this down because it's only our second problem we're doing. So still using a little bit of those training wheels, those supports that we need. All right, what is our A? Good, that 2 in the front. Phoenix, what's our B? Beautiful. I love that you put that negative in there. -8. Eric, what's our C? Beautiful. Thank you. All right, the 2 that tell me a lot is the A and the B. This is where one of our first checks come in that we just want to be thinking about. When I look at my A is 2. Is that A telling me that I'm going to have a minimum or a maximum? Is it going to be a happy face or a frowny face? Yeah, it's a positive. So positive tells me happy face, smiley face. With the smiley face, is that vertex a minimum or a maximum? Minimum. So that's a good check for us as we go to make sure that when we graph, we should have a graph that has a minimum. What's the next thing we need to do that we need to find? The vertex. Before we can do the table, we need to know where is the center going to be. Where is that vertex? So for the vertex, that's where we do that opposite of B over to A. The biggest mistake I see on this is people forget to do that opposite. So when we look at B, Phoenix said B was -8. So Ayan, what's going to be the opposite of -8? +8. Good. So +8. And then on the bottom we'll have 2 times, what's our A? 2. Okay, so 8 over 2 times 2, you can kind of maybe think through that mentally. 8 divided by 2, and then that times 2 is on the bottom with that 2. 2 times 2 is 4, so 8 divided by 4, 2. Okay, if you want to use that color, you can to just kind of star it and tell us that that's important. Because now when we go to our table, I want to use that vertex. We have our X, our inputs, our Y's, our outputs. And I want 2 to be an input. Do I want it to be my first input, my middle input, or the last input? Where does a vertex go? Middle. Good. So 2 goes in the middle. Okay, I'm just starring that way. I remember when I look back at my notes that was really important, and hopefully that will help me remember as we work. Okay, and then we're going to do 2 above and 2 below. So what would go above 2? Could be 1 or it could be 3, either one. I like to do 1. And then in front of 1? 0. After 2? 3, and then 4. If you had it backwards, you put 3 and 4 above and 1 and 0 on the bottom, that's okay. That is not something I am worried about right now. Okay? Alright, so now we have to go back. A lot of times this is part where if you can get to this part today, that's kind of the goal. Okay? The last part is really easy, but we get a little confused on it. We have to actually go back to the problem. So the problem said 2. And then anywhere I see an x, I'm going to use parentheses. So 2 parentheses squared minus 8. And then it goes x, so parentheses, plus 4. And I'm just going to write that there just so I remember that that's what I'm using. Again, when you do this on your practice, you might not write that part down. Okay, but since this is your notes, it's nice to know that that's what we're looking back at. Okay, Desmos is a really nice tool to use because we don't have to type everything in multiple times. So 2 parentheses squared, oops, you can't see my calculator, minus 8 parentheses plus 4. Okay, and now we're just doing our input and our output. So we're going to be putting these numbers in and saying what we get with the out. So when I put in 0, we get out 4. Okay, I'm going to delete those zeros and put in 1s. You have to make sure you put in 1s for both. When you put in 1s, we get out -2. Okay, delete those 1s, put in 2s, and we get -4. Now remember, that's our minimum. That's where it hits the bottom. So it goes from 4 down to -2, -4. What should happen when I do 3? It should match back up. It should be going back upwards. So when you put in 3, we get -2. And then this is a good check. 4, what should we get when you put in 4? Yeah, we should get back to that original, that 4, which we do, 4. Alright, I'm going to graph before I glue, just because it's easier to show this on the screen when they're close together. So 0, 4, 0, and then up 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. One, -2, so write 1, down 2. Two, -4, so write 2, down 4. That's our minimum, so it should be going back up. Good way for us to match at this point. 3, -2, good, so those match. And 4, 4. Okay, again, as you draw, do your best as you draw this out. You're going to try to make it a U, it's kind of a weird U-shaped graph. With arrows at both ends on the top. All right, so go ahead and glue that in if you haven't done so yet. All right, your quick check is different than normal today because it is on paper. Paper quick check. So the way that this is going to work is you are going to start it today. If you don't quite finish it, we'll have a little bit of time at the beginning of class to finish it tomorrow. And then you're going to make sure you tuck it into your notes because we'll look at it again tomorrow. Okay, put your name on it just in case you lose it, but this is your quick check today. It is on paper. So go ahead and put your name on it. It's just 2 problems, 1 problem on the front, 1 problem on the back. Okay, it should walk you through most of the steps there, so ask if you need help. I put a lot of support in there so that way you can kind of work on your own. Yeah. Yes, sir. Put it right there. Eric, you got one. Hassan, did I give you one?
Give me one. Not even.
Alright, so put your name on there. You're working through those 5 steps on both sides. If you need help, please ask. I know this feels like a lot of work. We have a little over 10 minutes. You should for sure get one side done. Need help, Ash? Nice job.